Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give everyone a few moments here to go ahead and join. We've got quite a few registrants today, so we want to make sure we give everyone an opportunity to go ahead and join us. But thank you so much for joining us, and just wait with us momentarily. Hi, for those of you that just went ahead and joined us, thank you for joining us today. We're giving everyone a few moments to go ahead and get a chance to join and get comfortable, and we'll be started in just a moment. Hello and welcome to those of you that just joined us. We're going to get started here in just a moment. We just want to give everyone a chance to go ahead and join and get comfortable. All right. Seems like we got a good group of folks now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Risks and Costs of Not Having EQMS. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see the attendee interface in your computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. You're listening in on your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect those and address them at the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Additionally, tomorrow you will receive a survey on this presentation, and we'd appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. That email will also contain a link to the recording of today's webinar. With that being said, I would now like to introduce David Rundell, Lead Business Consultant for Quality at QAD CBOS. David, go ahead and take it over.
Thanks, Lauren. Today we're going to be talking about the risks and costs of not having an EQMS. So even though I'm not going to be saying a whole lot about the software today, I do still need to show a safe harbor statement. So if I talk about anything that is related to futures, don't purchase software based on that. So that's the gist of the safe harbor statement. As she said, my name is David Rendell, the business consultant for quality, and I'm going to be going through this presentation. So I'm going to start off today with talking a little bit about, as quality people, this makes sense to us that when we have pains, we know that there's going to be costs involved with those pains. But it can sometimes be really difficult for us to communicate that through the organization to the people who can really make a difference relating to that. So I developed a little bit of a system here that should look very familiar to a lot of you, to kind of figure out how we can convey what the business impact can be to a lot of these pains that we have by not having an EQMS. So we're going to be seeing how we have pains, and we're going to walk through those. We're going to see how those can become risks, failures, and then go through to the end to see how we actually see the costs of those. So what is what in that? So the pain is what we feel every day. So that one's easy, right? I have to manually go through and approve all of the documents. And those pains can help us uncover risk because if we maybe miss some documents or we take a long time to approve those documents, that can start creating risk within the organization. Failures are the problems that are going to be caused by the pains. So they don't necessarily cause an issue themselves in what we're talking about, but they certainly can expose risk. And then the risk becomes much higher when the failures are uncontrolled. So I'm going to walk through a couple stories on this as to how we explain this. But the software is going to help us lower the risk by controlling those failures. And then everything has a cost, whether it's time, money, future business, customer satisfaction, things like that. It's all going to have a cost to us, whether it's tangible or somewhat intangible. Customer satisfaction is one of the largest metrics measured by most of the organizations that we work for. And yet, a lot of times you can't really assign an actual cost to that customer satisfaction. Maybe you can assign a cost to a lost program or a lost deal with certain customers because of that lost customer satisfaction. But over time, it's really difficult or impossible to calculate the actual total of that cost. So there's going to be hard costs that we talk about where it's very easy to determine what the impact is. For instance, if you make 5 bad parts because of an issue, then you can take the labor that it took to make those parts, the raw materials, etc., and develop a cost. But a lot of times that's going to be somewhat difficult. So let's talk about how we uncover those and put those in sort of a bucket where we can understand what are our hard costs, what are our soft costs, and what does that mean to the overall business. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to be profitable, right? We're all trying to make money, and a lot of times those manufacturing margins can be extremely thin. So not only identifying pains, risks, and failures, but costs are going to be a big help in understanding what we need to do. So let's start off with a little bit of a story. And this is going to kind of just walk us through what I mean by that. And this is just a personal story. So one day when my family was visiting up here in Michigan for Christmas, I started feeling a pain in my foot when I was walking around. Okay, so I was feeling that pain and I didn't do anything about it. So there wasn't really much risk in that, I thought, because my feet hurt. That's not a big deal. It was particularly painful, but I figured it's I'm a young guy. It's not a problem. Well, what I didn't know that there was an underlying issue there. So apparently I have flat feet, and I didn't know that. So I don't have that normal arch that people do. So when I felt that pain, if I had known that, that was something that I should have gone to immediately and gotten taken care of. So, but I was unaware that there was that failure within my body, that I have those flat feet. So I didn't know that I should go get that taken care of. So I let it go. And it got so bad that I eventually couldn't walk. And that is when I finally went to a doctor. So I finally decided to do something about it. But at that point, it was really far into it. I had already not been walking for a little while. I had been avoiding doing things I enjoy. There was a lot of costs going into this already, not to mention the cost of actually going to the doctor and then having to have a bunch of follow-up visits because it had gotten so serious already. I had ended up actually tearing a tendon in my foot, and this had then caused me to be in a walking boot. So that was another cost. Now I had to deal with that for weeks on end, as another thing that cost me money. So we're talking time now that costs me. We're talking enjoyment in my life. We're talking having to now deal with this walking boot. All of these are costs that I'm paying, not to mention the actual cost of just having to go to the doctor several times to get this taken care of. Eventually, my feet started to heal because of that, but my next cost is I now have to wear orthotics for the rest of my life. Otherwise, I will potentially re-tear that tendon, and I can no longer do things like wear slippers and stuff like that very often. So this has caused a huge problem in my life. It has created well, not a huge problem anymore now that it's fixed. At the time it was, but it has created all of these things that I had now paid in costs, and now I have to pay in costs for the rest of my life. So since I did not know about the risk or understand the failure when it happened, I ended up paying significantly more costs than I should have otherwise. Had I understood this, had I known that my grandpa had flat feet and his dad had flat feet and his dad had flat feet, I probably would have gotten this taken care of much sooner before I actually destroyed the arch in my foot. So that is that is a personal story, and now we want to relate that to manufacturing. So how do we have those same issues in manufacturing? Well, I came up with one example, and in this example, let's take a pane. A pane is a manual training system in that we have to enter everything that happens into Microsoft Excel by hand, right? We have to build our training matrix by hand. We have to update it by hand. When we update our documents, we have to come in and we have to find who needs to be trained by hand, right? Or processes or whatever the case is. So, but that's a pain. That's not necessarily a failure, and it's not necessarily a risk, although it will create risk. So the failure might be that not everyone gets trained. So we have that failure, not everyone gets trained, but that's not necessarily going to cost us money unless they make bad parts. So we have a risk of them making bad parts or using bad processes, and that's going to cost us a lot of money if that risk comes to fruition. So the risk here isn't that we have a manual system. The risk is that they're going to make bad parts, and the cost is going to be that we have to remake those parts. We have to scrap those parts, whatever the case is going to be. So other risks are going to be that a risk that we degrade trust in the system, and that's going to have a lot of costs down the road because now people think, well, I can't go to that Excel sheet because I don't know that that sheet is going to be actually accurate because it's all manual. And then there's a cost to that because now we have to dig more. We have to ask more questions. We have to do more to find the information that we can trust for training. And then another big cost that I see, and this is for quality departments across the world, is now we have significantly more time that needs to be spent to true up for audit. So I have an auditor coming in. Now I got to spend weeks trying to figure out all of the different things in my manual systems. Did we update all of our corrective actions properly and implement them and verify them? Did we train all of our people up? And if we did, what do we got to have people sign off on now? Things like that. If we go back a step, another failure might be that competent backups are not identified. So we don't know how to, who we can bring in. Maybe because we don't trust the system. Maybe because we don't train people to be backups because it's a manual system. It's difficult to do that, difficult to identify people, difficult for them to maybe express interest in being able to do other jobs in the organization. So our efficiency and quality of parts suffer, which means that because we don't have a quick and easy ability to say someone calls in sick, who can we grab off another line to fill this line? Or who can we call in to say maybe they can come in and work overtime? So we see some suffering from that. But then, and this is just an example, then we can have potential shutdowns during things like flu season or, I don't know, the day after St. Patrick's Day or the Super Bowl when a lot of people call in sick and don't want to come to work. Then our training system, since we can't trust it, since we don't know who we can bring over, since we haven't identified and trained people up as backups, we could potentially see lines shut down because we have too many people out. Whereas we might be able to, if we had a system that wasn't manual and there was more trust in it, and then we could have easily trained those backups beforehand. We could have identified people that have that interest, and we could have maybe prioritized how our people are working better otherwise. But so this is just one example. If you think about a QMS system and what's in a QMS system, there are so many other things and so many other pains that we have. So when we're trying to identify the costs of not having an EQMS system, this is a really good way to do it. Take those pains that we're feeling, and then figure out what the potential failures was going to be. And then if we have those failures, what are the risks and what are the costs going to be? Just by creating or by going through this exercise, it really helps you to understand where those costs are going to be, and it also helps you to be more effective at communicating up the chain into other departments what the costs to them are of not having an EQMS system. Because as we know, quality is within the entire organization, right? Everybody in the organization either contributes to or is affected by quality. And this is a really good way to put that into either actual dollars or into concepts that will be understood cost those actual dollars. So that's one way that we can effectively communicate that. And then by understanding those risks and costs, we can do continuous improvement initiatives that will be a heck of a lot more effective to our problems than maybe just fixing pains. Like if I have a pain that affects a lot of people, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cost to that pain is significant. We might have a pain that only affects a couple people. It doesn't seem like a big pain, but then we find the cost can be significant. So it's another way to really look at that, at what we should be doing for continuous improvement. So I've identified some other high cost risks that I'd like to just talk about a little bit. And so one of them is around new product introduction. So especially in places like automotive, aerospace, or industrial, if you're providing to an OEM or something like that, anytime you're providing into a OEM or another company, a past due new product introduction is a very bad thing to have. Granted, it's not a good thing to have if you're selling products like a white goods manufacturer, like you're making washing machines and things like that. But if you're doing this and you're sending it to an OEM, you could look at significant costs from fines from the OEM, or again, customer satisfaction problems, things like that. It's a huge driver of customer satisfaction. So not having an EQMS by default makes it 3% more likely that a product will not launch on time. And those are metrics that were given to us by a company called LNS Research. And we can see loss of future business, like I said, penalties, customer satisfaction issues, things of that nature. Or if we have a poor new product introduction system, then and we don't have things like read across and lessons learned, then we'll have a significant reduction in the effectiveness and the scope of those continuous improvement projects as well. So all of this really is driving towards, not all of it, but it's really driving towards continuous improvement, and the effectiveness of that can significantly be hindered by by not having an EQMS and a system that's going to allow you to do things like read across different processes. If you have a problem with a certain process, you don't want to fix it for the SKU that you found that problem, and you want to fix it for every SKU that utilizes that same process. So that's what we mean by the effectiveness there. So we're, as we said at the bottom here, unlikely to leverage process or design improvements made on other programs or other projects or other items. And we want to make sure we can leverage that. So again, that drives towards issues like customer satisfaction. It drives towards issues like PPM, making bad parts, maybe not having as good of processes as you could. Every penny that you save on the line is a penny that can go into your profits and your margin, which is really what we're driving towards in these businesses. So it's this idea that I've kind of this concept here is really about how do we utilize and leverage quality to improve the profitability of the business, because at the end of the day, that's what we're really driving towards. So another high cost risk is incomplete or ineffective risk management. This is something I've seen a lot of, especially over the last 3 years, while companies have been trying to get their arms around what do they want me to do with ISO 9001, with IATF 16949, ISO 1345, ISO 14001, ISO 31000, all of these different standards that are really now pushing risk management as a way to move from containing problems to preventing problems in the first place. So if we have this ineffective risk management, then we might have a failure to account for, say, supplier risks. And this is just an example I decided to go with here. When you're looking at your suppliers and you're determining the risk of those suppliers, that's something that's going to change on a consistent basis. Risk in supplier management is not something certainly that you can just complete and then you're done, because that's always going to change. You need to be able to have read across to all of your suppliers to understand how a changing world affects them. So we think about things like geopolitical events, shutting down borders, tax and tariff changes, things like that can really impact the risk to our supplier. If you're using a supplier in China and we have significant tariffs placed on them, we have to make sure that supplier is going to continue to be able to function, because perhaps they'll lose some business in the US and Europe or whatever the case is. And now maybe they're not going to be as good of a supplier. They could go out of business, and that could significantly impact us. Think about environmental events. These are the big ones that we've seen have maybe the most publicized issues with supplier risk management. Typhoons, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes. So we've seen certainly Southeast Asia impacted significantly on typhoons. We saw Toyota go from being the #1 car manufacturer in the world to #2 to GM again, and now GM still holds that mantle, I believe, as #1 auto manufacturer, because after Toyota had a supplier issue in 2011 and then a quality issue, I think, in 2013 related to the accelerator pedals. So that supplier risk management, coupled with not properly understanding their risk internally, has caused them to fall off as the #1 auto manufacturer in the world. So when we're going through this and we see things like climate change, we see things like the United States southern border having such significant turmoil right now when it comes to what's going to actually happen there, that really should be driving us to change our risk assessments on these suppliers. So let's take an example of, if I have 5 suppliers in Mexico, and so this is just an example for this. Every now and then, the United States president is saying something along the lines of maybe he's going to shut down the southern border for a day, for 2 days, whatever the case is, when he wants something. So every time that's said, we need to consider if that's something that can actually happen. And if that can actually happen, how is that going to impact us? If I have 5 suppliers below the southern border, then I won't be able to get things from them. So if the US president says that, then we might need to look at our risk assessments and say, okay, the severity of this risk hasn't changed, but the likelihood of this risk may have gone up, and we need to consider, do we need to dual source now? Do I need to have a backup supplier? Do I at least need to make sure somebody else can make what I need in case this happens? So as the likelihood of those risks goes up, as you guys know, as quality people, you need to figure out ways to control those risks. But if you don't know that those individual risks are going up because you have an ineffective risk management system that does not allow you to better understand your risks, especially across your supply chain, and then update those risks in mass and continuously move forward with that risk assessment as a living document, you're really going to struggle to control the risk properly, which can lead to disaster. So I got one more area of high cost risks, and then we're going to jump into a little bit different of a topic here. But a lack of integrated systems is really a lot of what this comes down to, in understanding when one person knows something, how does that information get out to the rest of the organization? So we might be doing handoffs by email. So I create a non-conformance in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, and I let a quality manager know it needs to be followed up on. Well, there could be a failure there where the quality manager doesn't get the email. He's on vacation. He comes back, and that goes by the wayside. Changes to one thing can affect something else. We talked about, if I change a document, how do I make sure people get trained? Well, we need to make that's a manual, person-based process. Following up is very difficult and time-consuming, and some different examples of that is corrective actions, following up, and updating a FEMA. Changing gauges, updating that control plan, changing that control plan to update that inspection plan, documents to training, like I mentioned. But then there can be these larger processes like the receipt of material to a receiving inspection, to a nonconformance, to a corrective action, to a document change, and so on and so forth. If you think about it, these 1 to 2 gauge to control plan to inspection plan, things like that, those aren't necessarily the biggest risks. It's when we have these long processes that we have where a break in that process can cause a delay, or not just a delay, but maybe someone just not doing it altogether and then not moving forward with it. So maybe we have a corrective action, but then documents don't get changed, so people don't get trained, so they don't actually change what they do, and so on and so forth. And then we're looking at significant costs that can be directly led back to those pains that we're feeling every single day within our organization. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that our quality system, especially in EQMS, is going to need to be integrated. So we need to improve processes. Point solutions will help us, but they'll improve processes more marginally. If I have a system that only does FEMAs, that's going to be a big benefit over utilizing Microsoft Excel, but I'm going to be missing so much because my corrective actions can't directly drive into it easily. I'm going to be missing potentially tie-ins to risk management. I'm going to be missing tie-ins to my inspection system. So that one FEMA application might be helpful, but that doesn't mean it's going to be as helpful as an EQMS, an integrated system. So we need to make sure it's going to be, they would need to be integrated together, which could take significantly more money. It's a higher cost to manage all processes within point solutions, and it's going to cause a lot more strain on your IT resources, who are likely just as strained as the quality department within your company by running as lean as possible. And they'll eventually need to be replaced by a full-fledged EQMS. So by going down the point solution route, you're really just delaying the inevitable of needing to get an EQMS that's going to be more beneficial. So if you're going to be getting a point solution, buy a point solution that's built within an EQMS so that you can then expand it out and utilize the rest of it. So I'll get to this in a second, but if you look at my next slide here, this is what we look at as a QMS maturity model. So by having point solutions, you really get about to here, to the desktop database area, where we have silos of data, no real links between the systems, static systems, more compliance focused than operational excellence focused. I look down the left side here, and this is where most customers sit with most of their processes, and we want to take them up to the right, where we have more of an automated EQMS, where we can get real-time insights. Driving that velocity of information is a big help, because if I can't understand what my problems are until I measure the metrics 3 months down the road, then my continuous improvement activities are going to be nowhere near as effective as they could be if I had that information sooner. And by having an EQMS, by having a system that's integrated with those and its ability to drive those metrics quickly and efficiently, it's going to make me a heck of a lot faster at getting ahead of problems and fixing them before they become huge problems. If I had just gone to the doctor when my foot first started hurting because I understood that in the past my family has a history of this, then I would have easily been able to avoid tearing my tendon, going through all those problems, and now not really being able to do some things because of fear of re-tearing that tendon. So that is something that I should have understood earlier on. And just like that, if you understand earlier on what some of your issues are and how they're impacting you, you can do a lot more in impacting them, or in fixing them. So this is an example of kind of a long process, but I think it's a process a lot of times we see. All of these could be manual handoffs with manual follow-ups, but most of the time, a lot of these things maybe aren't happening because there's no easy way to follow up. So for instance, moving from product specifications to DFMEA to PFMEA to control plan to creating those work instructions and inspections, getting training compliance on them. When we have a inspection, creating the nonconformance when there's a failure, moving forward to corrective actions or supplier corrective actions, then making sure that all updates our inventory, it updates our supplier performance metrics, and then we can go through and charge our suppliers back for what we spent as a part of these issues if it came from a supplier. All of these things need to happen, and we need them to happen quickly because there's potential problems involved. And again, if we don't get that information quickly, we're not going to be able to fix the problem as fast, and so we're going to have those pains that could be lasting, especially if the cost was to customer satisfaction, because then, just like my foot, we have this lagging and staying with us for potentially years if it was a big enough problem, like we delayed the launch of an OEM's product because our new product introduction was not done on time. So basically, this drives us to what do we want to have? We want to have a system that, of course, is compliance focused, or not. I'm sorry, is complies to the standards that we need to comply to, whether it's any of the ones going down the left there, and we need to make sure that it's going to cover the processes that we need to cover to help us improve our business, and that's the applications I'm showing on the right here. So those are that's how we would generally drive towards that. So like I mentioned, if you need a point solution, if you need an audit solution, for example, find a EQMS that has an audit solution within it so you can grow with that EQMS. If you need a nonconformance and corrective action solution, buy it within an EQMS. So again, you can grow with that, and don't just look at those point solutions, because eventually we're going to need to get to that point at some point. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk through make sure we understood what the differences were there, make sure we understood what the real cost of not having that EQMS is and the risks that drive those costs, and then how to better be able to communicate that up the chain so that we can get the help within the organization to fix that, and then you can become a real hero at your company by increasing that profit margin, that manufacturing margin, whatever the case is, by showing that quality really does impact all the other departments, and helping to push that change of culture to really put quality at the forefront. So that's the presentation today. I hope you enjoyed it. Lauren, did we have any questions come in?
We have not had any questions yet, but if anyone wants to take a moment and just submit some text questions through the questions pane, we will be happy to have a Q&A session at this time. All right. Well, it appears that you did a fantastic job, David, because it does not look like we have any questions.
Fabulous.
So,
okay, well.
Yeah, so with that being said, thank you, David, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, The Risks and Costs of Not Having EQMS. If you have other questions, please contact us at b3b@qad.com. Tomorrow you'll receive a survey on this presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. That email will also contain a link to the recording of today's webinar. On behalf of QAD CBOS and our presenter, thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.